Jokes.
We would never.
Oh, we're live right now. Oh.
Yes, sir.
Where's our show intro and our fancy little graphic and our song and our music? Welcome to the show.
Yeah.
SEC Football Live, already in progress. Aaron Dugan, Michael Bratton, Braden Gall here, all across all the Twitters and the YouTubes, of course, that SEC podcast, 440 Sports. We do appreciate you guys joining us each and every Tuesday right here on SEC Football Live. You can check it out on podcast form as well if you want to listen to it later on. Jump into the comment section, as we do appreciate each and every one of you guys for making this show far more interesting than just the three of us. You guys get in here and you turn it into a shit show, and we love that. So thank you guys. We got a lot of stuff to get to today on the program. We've got a Vanderbilt football game. An SEC football game is taking place. We're going to get into some of our favorite, most undervalued, underrated players in basically the entire conference that are going to dictate some outcomes of games this year. Quarterbacks and non-quarterbacks. We got to give some non-quarterbacks some love as well. Speaking of quarterbacks, Georgia has named there. So we talked about coordinators last week on the show and offenses in the blend. I think we didn't talk much about Mike Bobo and Carson Beck and Georgia. So we'll get a little bit into that today as well. But first, I just want to say college football is back, folks. How we feeling? Welcome back to our lovely sport.
Sneaks up every time.
Yeah, and what a slate, week one. I think the ESPN game is, what is it, UMass, New Mexico State?
Yeah, throw out the records. Listen, if you want to watch Notre Dame, if you want to watch USC, I'm not sure if you can get USC in the Southeast, but really it's all about SEC Network Vanderbilt, baby. Hosting Hawaii. We'll get to some of our best bets, but I just think it's been hot as shit.
Oh my God.
here in Nashville. So it doesn't quite feel like football season yet, but I'm assuming there's a lot of y'all that listen in some other areas of the country that maybe the weather broke for you. I know the what is it, the heat dome, or the what is it called? The thing that's like drifting across our country right now.
I don't know.
I hope somebody out there in the SEC area has like a Saturday morning this Saturday that smells and feels like football, where the weather breaks and it's like 73 and sunny, little bright sunshine, a nice cold beer, maybe a Bloody Mary, whatever your drink of choice is. I hope it feels like football somewhere for somebody in the SEC this weekend.
It will not be Vandy in Hawaii because the high is 99.
Damn. Well, how do you guys feel about Stadium Gate? Because they're pissed off for me for sharing this photo here.
Oh, how dare you?
I mean, I think it looks – I was trying to point out how nice the end zone looks. It looks finished. It looks ready for football. I didn't even hardly notice the construction.
So first of all, that fence looks dangerously close to the field if someone's going to lay out and catch a touchdown pass.
It does.
But Aaron, this is your alma mater. I was up there when I went to practice, you park in the parking garage that's like 10 stories tall, and you can look down into it.
Yep.
I also took some photos as well. Hawaii at Vanderbilt, we'll get right into it. Vandy minus 17.5, 7:30 p.m. Eastern time, 6:30, of course, SEC Network there. And I think there actually is some really interesting stuff to watch for Vanderbilt, especially for those of us who are obsessed with college football. We're not going to spend a ton of time on this game, but what are we looking forward to seeing aside from what does it look like when you play football in a stadium that's 2/3 built?
Well,
Mike, do you want to pick on us before I talk?
According to my sources, Vanderbilt hits more in camp than any SEC team. That's breaking news there. So, physical matchup here. I really just want to see. I want to see Vanderbilt's defense take that step because, I thought that's what we were getting with Clark Lee, and I realized the state of the roster he took over. It's not like he could just snap his fingers and we'd have a great defense, but they've been downright pathetic for virtually the entire tenure. So I just don't want to see him to be pathetic anymore. I want him to take that next step, and I think Hawaii is a great opponent to do it against. Here in Nashville, home game. I'm not sitting here saying you got to shut everybody out right out the gate, but there's a real opportunity, I think, to gain some confidence on the defensive side of the ball, and that's what we'll be looking for from Vanderbilt in this game, and really the first month of the season.
I mean, it can't really be probably more of a discrepancy between what we saw last year with there being like a 53, 63-10 at Hawaii last year, but I definitely think it's going to be closer. I think that 17.5 point spread. I mean, I don't know. What would you guys take in that? I think that's about right. I would maybe even take, I mean, I could see Vanderbilt winning by 3 touchdowns in this game.
I'd lay the points. I think. I mean, I know Hawaii is going to be better in year 2 under Timmy Chang, but I'd lay the points. I think your point about what you want to see is important, because while the defense plays extremely hard and they fly to the football in every play, even if they're giving up 56 points and are down by 40, they play really, really hard, which is a great compliment to the team. They need to make some, like, their biggest issue is they just don't have the dudes in the front seven to hold up against SEC teams. I am more interested in watching the offense, because I think AJ Swan, we'll get to this, I think is one of the more underrated players in the country. Or in the conference, I think Will Shepherd is an all SEC caliber receiver. He was at Media Days. He's a really good player. They've got some really nice depth at wide receiver. They really like their receiver room, and some young players are going to play a lot in this game. So I'm fascinated to watch the offense. I think that's the more interesting thing to watch in this game, is how good does the passing game look with AJ Swan starting his first game 1, because he started down the stretch last year. But I think the more important thing is what you said, Michael, which is the defense needs some confidence, because the defense couldn't bust a grape, as they say, last year, and they need to. That side of the ball is the furthest from being SEC quality. So
I think that confidence will come too if they can put some consistent pressure on Hawaii's offense and their quarterback. Is it Shager? Is that how you say it?
Who?
Hawaii's quarterback.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I was
Shager. I was making sure it wasn't Shager.
Yeah.
And
Shager.
That would be like much more regal, wouldn't it? Shager. But just being able to put some consistent pressure on them, Hawaii's going to want to throw the ball, and if Vanderbilt can keep that pressure high, it's just not going to work the whole game. And they've got, their running back Hines is very, can really produce and get the ball moving, but that's just not enough if he's one of your only real offensive weapons. That's a difference maker. I just think that's a lot of pressure to put on somebody to carry the ball that much.
Look at this Hawaii breakdown, Dukes. I like it. Breaking down the Hawaii offense.
I'm trying.
Prediction: Mike Wright scores more touchdowns than Vanderbilt. For the season, I don't think that's a thing that can happen. I don't think so. AJ Swan's pretty good. Mike Wright couldn't win the job from AJ Swan, although Mike Wright will be used in a very interesting way by Mississippi State this year. So we shall see what it looks like to have 2 quarterbacks on the field at the same time. I thought that was a interesting camp development. All right, here's my only question: over under 3.5 wins for Vanderbilt. Where are you guys going? I'm taking the over.
I'm taking the over.
Okay, we all agree. All right, Vandy minus 17.5 at home against Hawaii Saturday night. What you got?
I'll take Vandy, of course, man. Come on, man. They beat them by like 60 last year, and Vanderbilt's better, I think. So, what I do got to say one thing, though, Brayden. I mean, I guess credit, I'm a little bit of a troll myself, but this damn guy, I don't even know. I think I blocked him long ago, but he has got the damn world convinced that Vanderbilt's playing in a high school stadium this year. And I can't believe there's this many damn people that they read a tweet and they take it as factual information.
People really think that?
Are you really surprised that people read a tweet?
I mean, look at our comments. They're like, they're playing in a high school. I mean, this is every time I talk about Vanderbilt, they're like, what high school stadium? Is it Lipscomb?
I thought it was a joke.
Liberty? No, they all think they're playing in a high school stadium just because of one troll account said it.
Oh.
Guys, the endowment is $4.5 billion. They're not going to play in a high school stadium. They'd be more likely to play in one of the pro stadiums than a high school stadium.
Also, even without the end zone, it's still almost 30,000 seats, which is still 10 times the size of almost every high school stadium in Tennessee. But Mike, I am shocked that you think people are easily convinced on the internet of stupid shit. Like, what are you talking about? That's like the entire internet.
But it's just a random Twitter account that people believe.
They'd be more likely to get the engineering students out there to finish it on time than play in a high school stadium.
The most downloaded song in all of in all of the world right now is just some random thing that was made up by some guy. So I don't know. I'm not surprised by the internet ruining people's sense of reality. So I think internet is undefeated. The internet is totally undefeated. You can't beat the internet. It's impossible. Okay. Quickly, before we get into our favorite sort of underrated players that we think can have an impact on championship races and just are going to be superstars by the end of the season. We'll do quarterbacks. We'll do non-quarterbacks. I might have cheated, guys, and done a few position groups. I don't know if that counts, but we'll throw a few out at you guys.
It is cheating, but we'll allow it.
I want to get into, it's the SEC. We all kind of, there's the money under the table all the time. Carson Beck is the starting quarterback. This is sort of a 2 or 3 part question, and I want you guys to really explore the studio space on this. and that is going from Todd Monken to Mike Bobo. What do you got there from Barry? Mike, you can do no wrong in my book after, what did it say? Taking off Jim in Tuscaloosa?
Pissed off Jim from Tuscaloosa.
Here's the question. Does Jim hate you more or does Jim hate me more? Because when I host the Feinbaum show, he calls in to get me fired. He tries to get me fired from ESPN. I don't know. Who does he hate more?
Oh, definitely you. I think that's an easy answer for most people.
Wow. Aaron, do you agree?
No comment. I'll plead the fifth on that.
All right. All right, you assholes. Okay, Georgia, look, we know the personnel. Like, best offensive line in America, best receiving core in America, best tight ends in America. The running back room is a little banged up, but, still the envy of most teams in college football. Carson Beck named the starter. Mike Bobo is, this is deja vu all over again. I think he got a really bad rap by Georgia fans a long time ago. His offenses, before he left, were amongst the best offenses in all of college football from an efficiency standpoint. It is going to be different than Todd Monken. So just expectations. Is Carson Beck challenged? What do we think of the offensive changes? Are there going to be any changes? Do they throw the ball more? What do you guys think of the Carson Beck, Mike Bobo marriage in Athens?
I mean, I think that combination makes sense with Carson Beck and his skill set and, his ability to pass from the pocket and how that matches up with Bobo's style.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. There you go. There's Carson Beck's numbers there from Barry.
And I just this is kind of off topic. This isn't off topic, but I think just to throw this in here, it's a little bit of a less tangible X's and O's point. But what Carson Beck didn't have the easiest road to get here. He was faced with a lot of adversity. And I think that him playing under Stetson, who was also not born a elite college quarterback and we had no idea how far he would get. I definitely think that, the ability to, maybe at least fill that role by somebody who we didn't necessarily expect to do what he did. It's a good stepping stone for him.
Hell, I don't think it matters because I don't know if anyone's going to score 20 points on Georgia this year.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, how good do they have to be? I don't think.
That's a good question.
I think I don't know if you consider this a problem or not, but I don't know if they're really going to get tested till the SEC championship, till the playoff. And what happens when they are tested, when they're putting a 3rd and long and Carson's got to make a play to win the game.
It's a good point. Replicating the situation is damn near impossible. They're not challenged all the way up to the end. And sometimes that isn't the best order of events for a team. Sometimes it's better to get challenged early in the season, be able to put your ducks back in a row and, not lose again. So valid point.
And I agree with your point, Mike. If they win 38-17 every game, how do we know what Carson Beck does? Because again, what made Stetson Bennett special was literally in that situation, he was the dude. Yep. Missouri game on the road, the dude. Ohio State game, trailing in the 4th quarter, the dude. Alabama in the championship game, the dude. He made the play when the moment needed him to make the play, and we don't know that about Carson Beck. I think the weaponry is better even around the quarterback this year in terms of the passing game. So is Carson Beck? Now here's the other thing: Carson Beck is not some walk on that went to junior college.
No, I mean that's a good point. I didn't mean to compare him in that sense.
No, I didn't think you were. But this is a big-time 4-star recruit that came through the program, has sat and waited his turn. If you're betting on the Heisman Trophy, which is not necessarily a smart thing to do, but if you are betting on the Heisman Trophy, he would be the only player I think I would bet on in the SEC because you're going to get value. He's going to be a lower-ranked player in terms of the odds. You're going to get good value, and if he's the star quarterback for the number 1 team in the nation, he's going to get votes. So I think
Carson
the question
Beck's
is
your Heisman front runner from the SEC.
No, that's not what I said. I said he's your best. He's your best bet. Do you not understand?
He said he's one of the only. He said. I think
Michael
he said he was
not
one of the
understand how to
only
bet?
guys. I think you said he's one of the only guys that you.
You don't
Carson
bet on the
Beck?
fucking favorite. You don't bet on the favorite. You bet on the guy that gives you. Do you not know how wagering works? You bet on.
I mean, Jaden Daniels is not the favorite. That's a significantly better bet than Carson Beck.
But his odds are way worse
Joe
than
Milton
Carson Beck.
is a better bet.
Milton would be good, but that
because
would require
if Tennessee is good, he'll have to be outstanding. I think, which I don't think he is. But
if Georgia's not perfect, Like
Stetson Bennett finished ahead of Hendon Hooker in the Heisman. What are we talking about?
just saying, like Joe Milton's ceiling is higher in terms of like exceeding expectations, whereas everyone's like Georgia fans are hoping to go for 3 in a row, and so Carson Beck isn't damn near perfect. It's a lot of pressure to just be perfect or disappointing.
Look,
I'm not betting
Brock
on it. I'm
Bowers
not really.
is a better bet
when
than Carson Beck.
Jaden Daniels is number 2, I believe, in the Heisman right now, like plus 900. Carson Beck gives you plus 3,000. It's not a matter of who you actually think is better. It's about finding value on the wager board. Like, you don't wager on Georgia to win the national championship because they're like minus 300. Like, you'd have to put down $100 to, you see what I'm saying? Like, it's not about who sense. I'm not picking Carson Beck to win it. I'm saying if you're trying to find value on the board, I agree with you. Milton is a very good value play. I don't know how Milton does better than Hooker, though, because Hooker, I think, incorrectly finished 5th. I think he should have finished 2nd last year. I voted him 2nd on my ballot. As a voter, I put him number 2. I thought Hendon Hooker belonged at number 2. And so I don't know how Milton.
For those of you just joining us,
Junkins is a good play.
This is Sports Wagering 101 for Dummies. For those of you just joining us,
I don't.
We're trying to teach ourselves how to bet on sports in real time.
Hang on, scroll back up there because somebody said I said something interesting, which is important to me.
Braden's like, did I see my name?
Braden, that was an interesting take on the world's #1 song right now. Are you not in agreement with the lyrics? Do tell. No, actually, I love the song. I think the song's great. I think it's been weaponized, and the point is he came out of nowhere. He was a song that nobody's ever heard of. Nobody's ever heard of the athlete. Whatever.
Carter, don't worry.
If you are betting on the Heisman, I think Carson Beck is a smart value play if you want to throw $5 down on somebody, because the numbers are going to be there, the wins are going to be there. Georgia's going to be likely undefeated. It doesn't mean he's deserving. It doesn't mean he's going to win it. It's just a smart bet. That's all. That's all. That's all it is.
And do we even know if he'll be the starting quarterback by the end of the year?
Yeah, who knows? Who knows? I would think that he will.
Yeah, I do too. But
I want to go back to your point about being challenged, though, because I think that's the more interesting part of the Georgia conversation. There are really good teams on this schedule that would challenge most everybody else in college football. South Carolina, Ole Miss, Kentucky, Tennessee, Auburn at home, Auburn on the road.
Maybe Mizzou.
Mizzou as well. These are good football teams. I mean, Mizzou almost beat them last year. These are good football teams that could be anywhere between 7 and 9 wins that would largely challenge almost everybody in college football. But the schedule for Georgia sets up. So I guess the question is, where are they challenged? Nobody saw the Missouri game coming last year. So I think Ole Miss is dangerous to go down in there and challenge them the week before. I believe they go to Knoxville. Outside of Tennessee at home, where's the challenge?
This is a point that I've tried to make, and maybe I'm just trying to make an issue where there's not one. But
will you throw a schedule up when you have a second, Mike?
Yeah,
he was making a very sound point.
I know, but I want to hear his
too.
point while he's.
It's not necessarily related to the schedule, but in my mind, when I started to see Alabama take a slide, and I realized I'm not saying they're god awful or anything, but they needed to get receivers in there. They had to go to Ohio State. They had to go to Georgia. They needed help at left tackle. They had to go to Vanderbilt. They needed a running back. They had to go to Georgia Tech. I mean, that is not a sign of a team at the top of college football. That's a sign to me of development issues. And certainly I'm not suggesting that Georgia's got this huge issue, but receiver is one of the most important positions in the game of college football now. And what did they have to do? They had to go to Missouri. They had to go to Mississippi State. And I realize, it's not like they're asking Ra Thomas and Dominic Lovett to carry the football team, but I think that is something that is maybe being overlooked, to tell you that Georgia maybe that was their big issue last year. They didn't have that explosive passing plays outside of a Brock Bowers making, just incredible plays. I know Arian Smith made one in the college football playoff, and he's back, but I don't know. I'm seeing what happened to Bama a couple years ago. I'm wondering if that is all happening to Georgia. Because again, I'm in full favor of players getting paid. Never have I ever said anything against NIL or paying the players. But also, you got to think about what is the motivation for a Dominique Lovett and a Ra Thomas once they have gotten paid and they're wearing that G like they're the defending champs, but they've not done anything, not at an elite level. I don't know. I maybe just be rambling here, but that's a red flag to me that Georgia had to go to the portal to get 2 of these receivers. Now, maybe they're just huge additions and they just kill everybody, but that's what we thought about Jermaine Burton going to Alabama. And it didn't quite work for the Crimson Tide.
Can it be like a little bit of everything? Like I think taking Jahmyr Gibbs, for example, is the guy you're talking about from Georgia Tech, who was a 4-star, big-time recruit, huge recruit for Georgia Tech who landed him, and clearly an NFL caliber player. Like, this is a guy who got drafted in the top 15.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think that's different than taking the Vanderbilt left tackle. Like, I think those are 2 different things. Lovett was a top 10 SEC receiver last year at Missouri with no quarterback, and I think he wanted to play at a higher level. I'm not as sure about Ra. I think it's case-by-case basis. I mean, Ladd McConkey's a pretty good player. Like, I'm not worried about. I mean, they still have the best tight end.
I guess my point is Georgia
ever.
didn't have to do that the last 2 years. So it's just interesting to me that they're having to do that now.
That's like it's definitely like something you have to observe. You just don't know. It's like, is it, when we see what happens, is it going to be, the cause or just correlated? I mean, I think the transfer portal and having to go there for some players that you're seeing really quickly, not people that are being pulled out of the transfer portal to sit and learn underneath the current starting lineup. Those guys, if Georgia didn't have this system that it had, which is what we're used to seeing with Alabama, and I don't like to say plug and play because I think that really discredits a lot of the talent that you see put into these positions and being like, oh, well, anyone would work in that system. And that's just simply not true. But the structure that Georgia has, I think, does allow them to, quote, plug and play, for lack of better words, transfers into their system efficiently more quickly.
I mean, who's got so I think 2 things can be true, Mike. You could say, hey, I think this is kind of weird. They haven't done this before.
Yeah.
Are these guys going to be automatic? And also say,
could it work?
They're still the number 1 team in the nation. And then also a third thing could be true, which is I don't think they're going to win the national championship this year. Three-peating is just that hard. Complacency with 18 to 22-year-olds is just a natural force that's very difficult to fight. It's what makes Saban great. It's what makes all great coaches great, is being able to get the player to compete against themselves. I mean, that is the goal, is not to compete against anybody else. It's to compete against yourself. I will also ask you guys, though, outside of maybe Ohio State, here's Bo says Georgia will lose to either South Carolina, Tennessee, Auburn, or Kentucky. That's a lot of teams. That's like a third of their schedule. But
they could lose half of them.
I do think those are the best teams they're playing. I would put Ole Miss in there instead of South Carolina. I think Ole Miss is more dangerous late in the year. I think here's my question. Who's got a better receiving core if you include tight ends? Who's got better pass catchers in America outside of Ohio State? I think Tennessee might be the only one in the conference that I would say, 3-4 receivers, 2 tight ends. If you start talking 6 guys who can catch passes, there's nobody better than Georgia, in my opinion.
What about A&M?
It's not bad. It's pretty good. Smith, Stewart. Nobody like Brock Bowers, though.
Yeah.
We're going to get to underrated players. I still think Brock Bowers counts. Like, first team All-American, first tight end off the board in the draft. Everybody knows who he is, but nobody talks about how good he is.
Yeah, and I think that I totally agree. I just think that even though everyone knows his name and he's a well-known name, it's just he can make a difference that sometimes you only give that amount of real credibility and difference-making potential to someone that you're seeing the ball with constantly. Like, we're used to seeing running backs, star running backs and quarterbacks make that kind of a difference, but he's definitely brought a new air to tight end.
Mike, can I pick Georgia to lose in the playoff, but not because they had to go to the transfer portal for receivers? Can I say, is that fair?
Yeah.
Well, you have to give a reason why.
I kind of have. I think it's just impossible to three-peat. Nobody's ever done it since integration for a reason. Complacency, battling your own, level of expectation. I think it's really hard. I just think it's
very hard.
Nobody's ever done it for a reason. The greatest of all time have never done it. I just think is it possible that this is the greatest dynasty of all time in modern college football history? Sure.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just interested to see how they come out, because when they beat the hell out of Oregon last year in the opener, it was like, oh Jesus, they're just as good. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If not better. Now they don't have that marquee game, obviously, but so I don't really know if we'll see that against the competition they're playing. But if they're up by 50 points at halftime in both games, maybe maybe we get there, and we'll see how they look against South Carolina. But I don't know. I think they're one of the most interesting teams right out the gate because it could go that way, or they could just be. I could see a scenario where they just completely overlook these teams.
What happens if they destroy South Carolina? Because that's not like that's at home. It's their first real football team that they're going to play. I mean, have we learned? When do we learn though? Is it again? Is it? I think Auburn's the game we've all circled and said this is when we're going to learn. And if they go down to the Plains and Carson Beck is just slinging it all over the place and they dominate
I think it's
Auburn,
the Kentucky game. That's what I think. Because I think Kentucky will be undefeated.
I think Kentucky will be very good this year.
I think Kentucky is a good way to measure where your team is because it's solid. Like there's still like holes in some of the other teams that we're talking about. Like Auburn, we know what we think we'll expect, and we know that we expect it to be better than it has been, but there's still question marks around Auburn. I think I think Kentucky, even if they are not a team that we expect to go 11-1, they're a really good gauge of where you are because they're solid.
Yeah. Ken says this is a good point. Georgia plays Tennessee after the run of the cocktail party, which is always weird.
Yep.
Missouri and Ole Miss right before going to Knoxville. I think everybody knows the toughest game on the schedule is at Tennessee.
Totally.
That's obviously the most difficult schedule. But I think
Tennessee Martin, you're talking about?
To your original point, though, is like what happens if that is the toughest game that they play all season? And Carson Beck has not been forced to make a 3rd and 8 throw down by 3 the way Stetson Bennett continually delivered. We don't know. Like, this is the beauty of college football is we just don't know until we actually see it. We're not sure how it's going to work out.
Yeah.
And, we'll see. Defensively, also, Georgia pretty good.
Yeah, very. I mean, I think, so for Tennessee in that game specifically, what do you guys think has to happen that didn't happen last year? Or the year before, or historically with this matchup? What has happened for Tennessee that could make a difference? Besides, like not settling for field goals, which is kind of what we saw.
They got to run the football.
There's no Jalen Carter for Georgia, so that's. But I don't know how good. I don't know how good Tennessee's offensive line is either. So
yeah, convert on 3rd down. Like find a way to stay on the field. I don't know if y'all had anything else that you're like, this is what has to happen for that.
So it's weird. And we talked about this last week on the show, and I caught some heat from you guys about this and some of the audience members. Like, it's weird. Like the formula to beat Georgia is like Ohio State's formula to have a superstar quarterback and elite receivers and to try to sling it all over the yard the way Bryce Young did in the SEC title game 2 years ago. And so like that's kind of the formula. Tennessee had a lot of those pieces last year, but Tennessee's offense plays off of the run, and Georgia stops the run all the time. So it's.
But couldn't you also say Missouri? I mean, that they clearly didn't have that, and they nearly knocked them off. I mean, because they won on the line of scrimmage,
and that's the defensive side, right? Like, this is going to sound rude to Missouri, and I don't mean to be rude to Missouri. That's also clearly Georgia overlooking them, right?
Yeah, I think that's fair.
I mean, no one's expecting it. You're a 25-point favorite. You go up to Columbia. It's a little cooler than you thought. Missouri's defense is better than you thought. You know what I mean? Like you clearly weren't focused, and then you kind of wake up in the second half, right?
Right. Maybe they were pulling a Johnny Manziel the night before. Who knows?
In no way can you compare Missouri's roster to Georgia's roster last year. Like in no world can you do that.
But they out-physicaled them, and that was the key to that game.
Does Tennessee have as good a defense this year as Missouri did last year?
I would probably say no, but I think it'll be better than it was last year.
I think that's possible. Breaking parallels. Tennessee won't run the ball. No one has really run the ball in Georgia for over 4 years. That's the problem. No one has been able to do that. We shall see. Okay. Do you guys want to get into some? Is there any? Do we want to make any final? We can do this next week on the show. Make some final picks and proclamations. But if you guys have anything, we can save it for next week. My instinct is Georgia goes undefeated, but doesn't win the national championship. Goes undefeated in the regular season and doesn't win the national championship. That's my instinct. But
7-5. That's what I'm going.
There we go. There we go. Bama finishes 4th in the West. Georgia 7-5.
Against the spread.
Michael W. Bratton.
I think a couple of those teams that do have the formula to beat Georgia will be teams that Georgia doesn't see, obviously, until the postseason, which they can, win that game against Tennessee in like a very outright fashion. Maybe we'll feel otherwise after that last game after the Tennessee game moving into the postseason. But there's teams that they will only see from the West once they get through the regular season.
Yeah. The beauty of college football is right now we think we know what Ole Miss is. We think we know what Tennessee could be. We think we all kind of like Kentucky. We all kind of like this team and that team. We think this team is going to be good at this and bad at that. And then by the time the game gets around, sometimes it's totally freaking different. So,
well, speaking of that, I did want to ask you guys real quick, Auburn. I would be equally unsurprised if they won 5 games as I would if they won 10. I have no idea what the hell Auburn will be because of all the transfers and the coaching change.
I'd be more surprised about 10, but I agree with you that I don't know what to expect.
If you told me 5 or 9, I might still go 5. But if you said 5 or 8, I'd be like totally dead even. 8 would be completely even. That's all I would say.
And I think it will be above 5. But
I think so too. I was gonna say who's is that? Is that Aaron or Mike?
That's not me.
That's Kirby over here.
Kirby, your dog Kirby? Naming him after the Georgia Bulldogs head football coach. Man, you're losing your vol card there, big guy.
For real.
I think Auburn's gonna be better because Hugh Freeze always makes teams better. I think the lines of scrimmage are still a question, but I think they're going to win a couple of games because Hugh Freeze is going to out scheme some folks. I don't know what to make of the quarterback situation. I think that is I don't think Peyton Thorne is the guy that maximizes the offense, but I think he might be their best option this year. So we'll see.
Mm-hmm.
They are the new LSU for me.
How about this? They are going to beat at least one, if not 2 teams they're not supposed to.
Yeah.
It might be Bama at the end of the year, frankly.
I feel like they always, except for like a little bit of in the depths of the Brian Harsin dumpster fire, as we called it. I feel like they almost always pulled off a couple that they shouldn't, but I feel like under him it was maybe only one.
They won the Missouri game because Missouri dropped the football, literally dropped the football, going across the goal line, and then missed a field goal. I think they're going to beat somebody. I mean, somebody legit. They're going to beat somebody. They play Georgia, they play Bama, they play LSU. We're talking top 10 teams. I think they get one of those 3. How about that?
The funniest thing about that Auburn-Missouri game was Drink was angling to get that Auburn job, and he lost it when that damn guy dropped the ball. I mean, come on.
Come on, man.
Come on, man.
He was literally walking into the end zone to win the game, and he just
maybe he knew. Maybe he knew. He was like, "To hell with you, Drink."
You absolutely hate to see it.
Oh man, hate to see it. Okay, so main topic on the show today, sort of it's combination of our favorite players who don't get enough run, who don't get enough national attention, who don't get talked about enough, that are going to have a major impact on the championship races and the divisions and how teams fare this year. And so it's part breakout player, part underrated player, just a general conversation. We're going to throw a lot of different names at you guys. I've written down a lot of different stuff here. So we'll do quarterbacks. We'll do non-quarterbacks.
Yep.
I'll let you guys go first on quarterback. I want to go first on non-quarterback. So I'll let you guys go. I'll let you guys go first on the quarterback. So take it away, boys and girls.
Mike, you're me. As long as you don't say Caleb Williams, we won't fight.
Yeah, go. I'll let you go.
Okay. I went with Caleb Williams just because I think that
this is in the SEC, Aaron.
What?
In the SEC.
Oh, I thought it was all over the country because they are affecting each other.
How can Caleb Williams?
Difference makers to the SEC. Oh, man. I thought we were doing nationwide. I was like, oh, this is expansive. I love this for us. I was like, the options are endless.
But how can the reigning Heisman Trophy winner be underrated?
Well, it wasn't just underrated. It was difference makers at quarterback. Oh, man. I thought we were going nationwide in this.
He may. Who knows?
Okay,
we might be talking about Caleb Williams by the end of the season.
So, I mean, I guess I'd have to go Jaden Daniels, but I think it's hard to have a underrated, the quarterback is such a important position. It's a little bit hard to fly under the radar with difference makers. I mean, Jaden Daniels, I think with how low his turnover rate was, and just what he's able to do with ball security, his ability to make decisions quickly on the field. I think especially with a team that's still trying to lock it all up and get it together, that's really important. But it also says a lot about him, because when you do have a team that's still on the up and up like LSU is right now, to have a quarterback that the coaching staff trusts enough to just make decisions in real time, says a lot about him. It's just hard to call him underrated because we know how talented he is, or difference maker and underrated, I know are different. And then just like, becoming the sole signal caller, and then also, rushing for 1,000 yards just shows that no matter if a team's passing defense is just exceptional, he's like, okay, well, watch me run. And I think for that reason, he makes the most sense, like in this particular conversation, since we are staying on topic, considering this is an SEC podcast. I just went with it though. I was like, okay, this sounds fun. But yeah, I went Jane Daniels on the quarterback.
Well, yeah, I guess I should have rephrased it a little bit better, but kind of the way I was thinking, like this time last year, outside of diehard recruiting people, who would have known the name Harold Perkins? And he impacted LSU, and he really impacted the SEC race. He made some big-time plays for most of the season, particularly in that Alabama game. So that's kind of where I'm thinking. And not that this guy is by any means under the radar, but when we're talking impacting the upcoming season and the races, again, not necessarily saying that his team is going to win it all or anything, but I think he could derail a season or maybe be the difference in his team winning the division and maybe the SEC. But I got to go Nico. And I'm going there because all the people, all the people that are doubting Joe Milton, they may be 100% correct. And I don't think we'll really know anything about Joe Milton and how far he really came. They can say whatever they want. I've heard this many times before. They were hyping him up years ago. Michigan hyped him up years ago. And I think he could be a better player. I'm not completely doubting him. But we cannot judge him until week 3 of the season when they play at Florida. They should beat the hell out of Florida. I don't care how good Florida is, but there's no guarantees. And that's a house of horror for Tennessee. They haven't won down there since, 2003.
I was in college at the University of Tennessee the last time they won.
If he has an embarrassing performance and Tennessee loses, this is going to start early. So the way I'm looking at it, Nico, again, I'm not saying he should be the starter right now. I think that's foolish. But I think by the end of the year, particularly you're looking at this Georgia matchup, you asked back to what you said, Braden, how do you beat Georgia? You got to have an elite, out-of-the-world quarterback. And maybe Nico's that. Maybe he costs Alabama the West. Maybe he costs Georgia a chance to go. If Georgia goes 11-1 and loses at Tennessee, they're not making the college football playoff. Unless they still won the East and win the SEC, then they can make it. But if they lose to Tennessee and they do not win the East, they are not going to the college football playoff.
But how is that possible if they're so bad that they have to switch quarterbacks? Like that's I agree with Nico's upside that when he does realize his potential, that's what elevates Tennessee to the next level.
Because didn't that happen with Clemson with Kelly Bryant? And then he lost the job and insert Trevor Lawrence and they won the national championship?
I think comparing Nico Iamaleava to Trevor Lawrence as a true freshman is a reach.
I mean, they're virtually the same graded prospect. Alabama wanted him. Georgia wanted him. This is Josh Heupel, quarterback-friendly system, got all the weapons in the world. It's still the same team. Insert a quarterback. These quarterbacks come in more ready for the college game than they ever have before. And hey, Trevor Lawrence wasn't Trevor Lawrence till he actually got it done, So
I guess
that's kind of why I'm saying Nico.
So first of all, I think that's the right exercise here, right? Like somebody said Connor Wigman and Evan Stewart, and I will say it's very difficult sometimes to know because we're inside of it all the time, and we're talking about it all the time, and we are reading about it and writing about it, and it's hard to know like who counts kind of as an under the radar sort of breakout player. Like I would say nationally, no one knows the name Evan Stewart. Like I would say nationally, nobody. SEC football fans know who that is. Recruiting fans definitely know who that is. And we all think he's about to break out. I think everybody in recruiting and in the SEC knows who Nico is. I think to me, the formula, like I don't think anyone is the same as Trevor Lawrence. I don't think the Tennessee roster is the same as Clemson's roster. And I think there's some things that aren't the same, but I also don't know. I think Joe Milton's going to have a pretty good year. I don't think it's better than Hendon Hooker.
I thought you hated him.
I don't think it's better than Hendon Hooker, but I think he's going to have a good season. In part because I think one of the most underrated groups of players in the entire country is Tennessee's wide receivers. And it's not just Brew McCoy. it's Ramel Keaton, it's Squirrel White, and I think it's Deontay Thornton. That they are going to have dudes everywhere. And so I think Milton's going to find a lot of open receivers a lot of the time in most games. I don't think he's good enough to beat Alabama on the road. But if you don't beat Alabama on the road, or you lose to Florida on the road because Joe Milton wasn't good enough, you then can't come back and beat Georgia and still win the division if they're 11-1. Like, you have to win every other game still. You see what I'm saying? Like, the math doesn't line up in my head. Maybe it does.
Well, hell, I got LSU winning the SEC anyway. So what if Georgia
Okay.
loses to Tennessee and they lose to LSU in the?
Then they're out.
You know.
Yeah. Yeah, then they're out. I think so. I want to ask you guys this, because I think Devin Leary and Will Rogers are underrated. Like, I don't think people talk about them enough. Like KJ Jefferson, Jaden Daniels, I think to some degree, but KJ gets a lot of credit for being the best quarterback in the conference. Fine, rightly so. But I don't think people talk enough about if one of these quarterbacks, to your point, Mike, is going to totally destroy the race. Is Will Rogers and all that senior veteran leadership around him at Mississippi State good enough to win some games? They host Alabama, for example. Like, are they good enough to win some games that totally screw up the entire conference schedule? I think it's possible. And he got voted. He was 4th at media days, all SEC quarterback, the leading passer in conference history in every category, 4th. And Devin Leary wasn't even on all SEC teams at Kentucky.
Mm-hmm.
So are those guys underrated? I think nationally they are. I think in the conference they're not. But I would put those two names, and I'll go a tier down from that and go AJ Swan as well. I think he's super underrated.
Yeah,
in the conference
on a national playing field. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that. I don't think there's any team in the SEC that is gonna, come back in for practice or like reviewing tape on a Sunday after Saturday game or a Monday morning meeting and overlook any of the people you just named. I think any opposing team is going to see them for exactly what they are. But I do agree, like on a national playing field, yes, those names are not talked about nearly enough. But it ain't the SEC that's overlooking those guys, or at least I wouldn't be.
I would disagree with you on Will Rogers being underrated. I think he's properly rated. And I get why Mississippi State, I mean, they're just going to support their guy regardless. But when you're throwing the ball 80% of the time and you start for 3 years.
Oh, yeah, the numbers are inflated. Yeah.
You're going to have those. I mean, hell, every quarterback Mike Leach has had has got those numbers. But a lot of them don't start for 3 years. So you're saying 4th best. I think that's about what he is, the 4th best in the SEC. And that makes you around in my mind, a top 10 quarterback in the country. So I think that's right where he is. I mean, I don't think he's underrated. I don't think he's overrated. I think that's kind of properly, but
he's just rated.
I think you nailed it with Devin Leary. I think he's the one that is underrated, and they also host Alabama. So
that's true.
Maybe that's a matchup. They host Tennessee. They play at Georgia. I mean, these are the games where I think Devin Leary, if he comes up and he plays as well as he can, I think they can beat all those teams, Georgia included, and so does the Kentucky coaching staff. So again, I'm not crazy enough to say they'll beat all those teams and certainly not win in Athens, but that would not be like a complete stunner to me.
How about Bo saying Max Johnson? That's fascinating because he in the sort of zeitgeist group think of the SEC summer, like he's not a name that anyone has talked about at all. But it's like how deep do you have to go to find the guy that's underrated? Like I think AJ Swan is better than what people talk about with him. I think Devin Leary is better than what people talk about with him. People talk a lot about Joe Milton because of the offense, so he's probably properly rated. I thought he might have even be a touch overrated as the 3rd team all SEC quarterback, but I think he's going to have great numbers. Spencer Rattler is talked about ad nauseum. Everybody talks about Spencer Rattler, and I think he's properly rated, like kind of in the middle. Somebody's going to be an elite player that we don't know, whether that's Wigman or Carson Beck or Milroe or Jackson Dart. Like somebody's going to be really, really, really good. And I'll lean Leary, and I might actually be coming around on Jackson Dart, but I don't. That feels dangerous.
Why?
The accuracy. I need to see it.
That was the main. Yeah. Oh, I'm saying, why are you coming around?
Well, I mean, I think that offense is very good. I think Judkins is an elite weapon to lean on. I think he's had a whole year of starting, which Wigman, Beck, and Milroe haven't. Like, I just think there's a lot to like if he puts it together.
Right.
But if's the largest word in the English language, and if my aunt had balls, she'd be my uncle. So there you go.
I put Jackson Dart
Yeah.
number 3 in my quarterback rankings this summer,
Ooh.
so I think you're right on that one.
So let me ask you about, like, we talked about Brock Bowers for a second. I still don't think that his level of talent and ability at his position historically is appreciated nationally. I don't think nationally, sure, he's first team All-American, so hard to say he's underrated. But I think he and Harold Perkins might be the best 2 football players on the like college football players on the planet. And I just don't think he's talked about in that way. Am I crazy for saying that Brock Bowers is underrated?
Well, no, because of how you're saying it. I think, when you can cause a team to rewrite or redistribute the plays that they're calling and why around a certain position, I think you've done a lot. And just to think about how Brock Bowers actually changed that scheme, and the playbook was redistributed to make sure that he was as big of a part of it that he needed to be. I mean, you've definitely made a dent if you're doing that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how you can say he's underrated. I just said I think he's the best Heisman bet on Georgia, and I think he's been the best offensive player for back-to-back national champion. He's preseason first team All-American. He's another one properly rated. I mean, he's going to be a top 5 pick in the upcoming draft if he made it come back. I don't think he would, but I mean, he'll be top 5, top 10 guaranteed. I think he'll be top 5. I think he's that, because as good as he is as a pass catcher, he's just as good as a run blocker.
Is it the
I don't think he gets enough talk. People don't talk about him.
You think it's because the position is underrated as a whole?
Yes, I think it's hard to quantify what Mike just said. It's hard to quantify the value of somebody who catches like 52 passes for like 700 yards. But like, it's what he does after the catch. It's what he does to manipulate defenses, forcing coverages. It's what he does in the running game. It's hard to put it's easy to look at running backs and receivers and see their value, whereas it's harder to see a guy who does everything. And I also think, to me, Brock Bowers at his position is just better than everybody we've had at that position in a long time. That's all. Talking about underrated players that may be unknown or not talked about, proceeds to talk about preseason All-American for reigning national champion.
100% valid.
Look, people don't talk about him nationally the way he should be. The same thing with Harold Perkins. People don't talk about him. Those could be the best 2 players in the entire country, and people don't say that sentence out loud.
Well, we can talk about people that are known less than Brock Bowers now.
All right. Well, then let me do the name that I wrote down for this exercise.
It feels like Brock Bowers paid Braden an NIL to talk about him.
I'll take money to talk about people. It's fine. Here's the name I wrote down for name that's undervalued, that I think has a huge impact on the potential championship race, that I think is not talked about in SEC circles or in national circles, but has a chance to be a superstar. Deion Walker, defensive lineman, Kentucky, freshman All-American last year, 6'6", 350, and could be the centerpiece of a Kentucky defensive line that could help them challenge-ish, I'm going to say, for second place in the East. This is a guy who had to be pulled out of practice this weekend. He was so good. Mark Stoops had to take him off the field. He was so dominant. I think Deion Walker is not talked about enough, is a rising superstar, big-time recruit, and as a true sophomore could be one of the best defensive players in America this year. And I don't think anyone is talking about Deion Walker at Kentucky.
I think the only problem with that is that they lost Justin Rogers next to him. And sometimes, this is not to discredit, because everything you just said is accurate, but sometimes, I mean, who offense is going to focus on last year? Are they going to focus on the freshman, or are they going to focus on the stout nose guard that transferred to Auburn for who knows what reason? But you know what I mean? Like,
I think we all know
that is the only potential holdup there. But again, I don't think that discredits anything that he'll do. But I just think he would be even better, obviously, if he had Justin Rogers still next to him.
Yeah, I agree. But doesn't he fit
a good one?
Doesn't he fit the exercise, right? Like,
that's perfect.
Yeah. All right, what you guys got?
Me next. I went with the linebacker from LSU, Spite. I think I'm saying it right. Omar Spites. Correct? Anyone correct me now or forever hold your peace? He is. I see him being impactful as a player right out of the gate. And I know that position, sometimes those defensive positions, unless you're, you know, a defensive end, like having those glorified like sack moments, you don't necessarily think about some of these defensive positions as, they're just not, those names aren't as much household names. Line guys never really get the credit, and sometimes linebackers fall in that same category. I mean, his dad played for the Giants. His brother was drafted at the Colts. They're just like an athletic. Wait, no, hold on. I have two people down here, Caleb Downs and Omar Spite. So that was
Ooh,
Caleb, but
Caleb
Omar is
Downs. Great
his
call.
size as a linebacker. He's over 6 feet. He's 237 pounds. I'm reading some of this because I don't know all of these by heart, but the 85 tackles and 6.5 tackles for loss in his 2 seasons at Oregon. I think you can just see the numbers at an already elite program. It's not like he's coming from a smaller program. Like I wrote down a couple guys at Ole Miss that are now playing for the defense. And like one came from James Madison, and not that that's not credible, but being able to put up those numbers at a place like Oregon, I think just makes that transition from into the SEC a little bit less painful because we've already seen him produce for that on that level. And so I just think that trying to fill in some of those holes for LSU that have been concerns in the past will help make them a more complete team.
And then another guy that I wanted to reference, I think it's safe to assume Alabama is transitioning what they want to do on offense, and they're going to be a lot more ground attack focused and less quarterback central.
You're gonna take my guys here.
I'm going to go Jam Miller, sophomore running back. I
Yep.
think he's emerged as the best one of the bunch. Now, I could be wrong just because they got so many options there, but that's the guy that I'm hearing in camp is kind of emerged as the best running back of the bunch. He was not even the highest rated of several of the guys they have in that backfield. But, that's another guy. I think if he emerges, I'm certainly underrating Alabama, what they could be. There, who knows? Maybe the next Heisman winner from Alabama is in that backfield right now. And so I like Jam Miller. And then I got one more because I don't want to steal yours, Braden.
No, I actually I'm glad you mentioned him because I wrote down here Alabama running backs right there because I think it's a really underrated room. Justice Haynes is a little banged up, but every time Saban talks about Jace McClellan and Roydell Williams, he always adds Jam Miller to the mix. And he's talked a lot about how good they are picking up the blitz. I think they're going to go back to that 2017 style Bama. I think Milroe's the starter, and if you're going to do that, you're going to turn around and give the ball to those dudes. I just think that running back room, because Gibbs took so much focus last year, I think that running back room is way better than people think. And that includes Miller and Haynes and Williams and McClellan. I think they're all going to get a ton of touches. So I'm with you on Jam. I think I completely agree. I think Bama's running back room is really underrated.
And then one other guy to keep an eye on this fall. And again, I'm not suggesting this team's going to win the West because this guy's going to be an animal or anything like that. But if he can just make 2 or 3 game-defining plays in a marquee matchup against an Alabama, against an LSU, against a Georgia, perhaps Ole Miss can surprise some people. And I'm going freshman linebacker Suntarine Perkins, outside linebacker, pass rusher here. Great things about him. And I think he's a perfect fit for that Pete Golding defense. Now, he's not Will Anderson. There's not another Will Anderson in college football. But if he can kind of fill that role to a small extent, maybe he can be the next Harold Perkins. That gives you some game-defining plays, particularly late in the season in conference play. Suntarine Perkins, I think he's poised to be a big emerging defender in the SEC.
Go ahead, Aaron.
I was just the other couple of guys that I wrote down were both defensive players for Ole Miss, because I think that I know we've talked a lot about like who has the higher ceiling, but I think Ole Miss has, with the coaching change, whatever you think about Hugh Freeze, fair, but we've seen what he can do in terms of turning teams around. So Jared Ivey and Isaac Ukwu. Isaac Ukwu came from in the transfer portal. I believe he's the one from James Madison that we were just talking about a minute ago. 40 tackles, 10.5 tackles for loss. He's just putting up huge numbers. Like, people are worried if that's going to translate in the SEC, and we really won't know till he gets there. But there's a lot of hype around his arrival in Oxford, and I think that he'll be a great addition. And then Jared Ivey is, we've seen him before. He's, I think number 4 in the 5 returning SEC defensive linemen, and he's just his work in the backfield and just his pure amount of tackles. I think those two combined with what Mike just said is really going to put Ole Miss in a good position to do some stuff different than they were able to do last year.
Justin Rogers had to fill his
feed his bulldog.
Feed his bulldog. A lot of good names, by the way, in the comments. Ruben Owens is in there. Mason Taylor, tight end at LSU, is in there. We had a bunch of guys mentioning some of those A&M players. Again, there's Trojan Jeff Coates at Texas or at Arkansas. I want to, you mentioned there's no Will Anderson. I think I could argue Harold Perkins is this year's Will Anderson. Let me ask you this: does Mason Smith count as not being talked about, as underrated? Because he's largely considered one of the best defensive linemen in the conference, but he was so hurt last year, he didn't play so much. It's almost as if Perkins gets more coverage. You mentioned Spates. They've also got the transfer in Wingo. Like, to me, Smith could be the guy that changes their entire defense if he can stay healthy and on the field for the entire season. That makes them one of the best defenses in the country and capable of going on the road and beating Alabama. But I think you need Mason Smith, who grades out so highly by NFL scouts. You need 2 A's in his name. So I think Smith is the guy. I think he's great. I don't know if he counts as underrated though, because he's pretty well regarded. Yeah. Again, I think the difficulty here is balancing talking to a really smart football audience that knows a lot of these names already versus if I went on ESPN and I said Mason Smith, no one have a clue what I'm talking about. Like, it's a balancing act. So I'll throw Trevor Etienne out there as well at Florida. I think he's a really good player. Their tailback, Travis's little brother. I think they actually have some nice weapons at Florida. It's a question of whether or not the quarterback can get the ball to him. But I think Trevor Etienne's another one. I don't think that changes the outcome of the East, though. It's. I don't think that's what takes place. Anybody else you guys want to throw out there? I think.
I love the Mason Smith call out. I think I've really enjoyed following his journey. He's had injuries, but there's a lot of talk. I don't know. I kind of dig into sometimes the non-X and O's parts of the sport, and he's a team guy. Not only is he going to be able to show up and do what he needs to do, but he was such a mentor to the other guys in his position group when he was not on the field. And I think that says a lot about he's not just there to show up and show out, which we've seen with LSU players from time to time. It's the same thing I talk about with Kentucky basketball. You've got all these huge recruits, but can you make them work together? And LSU's had that problem in the past. You got the talent, no question about it, but can they work together? And he is a exemplary example of that.
Michael Williams at Georgia is a perfect example. That's a dude that wasn't really a full-time starter last year, is probably already well known by everyone in the SEC, but there's no way national college football fans know how good he is yet. I would argue he's underrated, but again, he's a first-team All-SEC player. So how do you?
I got one more. Noah Thomas, receiver for Texas A&M. They're loaded at receiver, but in these big-time matches, when you're playing Alabama, when you're playing, who knows, a Georgia in an SEC championship, those are the players that have got to make a play or two, and I'm talking touchdown-type plays, if you're going to win in these marquee games, because they're, Alabama, Georgia, they're not going to let the Evan Stewart, they're going to give them all the attention in the world, the Aniyah Smith, the Moose Muhammad. They're going to be keyed in on those guys, so someone else has to step up, make a play at the big-time moments. I think Noah Thomas can be that for A&M.
Yeah, and you have to sometimes, when you are A&M, even though they're as good as they are, you have to play from behind when you're playing teams like Alabama and Georgia. They're not going to be up that whole game. So can you put points on the board quickly in a high-stakes situation? And they're receivers are a big part of doing that.
Barry and Brown at wide receiver at Kentucky. It's almost like he's a guy that, Mike, you and I have talked about a lot this summer. So
a lot of all SEC already guys being mentioned.
I was gonna say, but even then though, I've got Tyrone Hopper written down and Darius Robinson, a linebacker, defensive lineman from Missouri. That front seven we've talked a lot about the front seven, but we don't mention the names a ton. But again, those guys are all SEC caliber players, but I would argue they're still a little underrated. They're still guys that don't get enough coverage for being as good as they really are. So
that's right. We treat that as a unit, and we really it is good habit to call those guys out because they definitely deserve it.
And which of these players can actually change the course of a race in the division, West or East? And maybe the Missouri front seven is one of those. I think the Tennessee wide receiver core, because the two guys went pro and Tillman and Hyatt got all the coverage, I think the Tennessee receiving core is wildly underrated by everyone. SEC, nationally, I think they have 4 legit dudes that are going to put up numbers this year. Now, maybe they spread the ball around too much for anybody to be a Biletnikoff winner, but I would. There's very few receiving cores I would trade if I was Tennessee for my guys.
Well, I trust Alabama's defensive backs to, produce another Biletnikoff winner for Tennessee. I really do.
You mentioned Caleb Downs. That's a good, smart mention there. True freshman safety, going to start probably. They're going to have Alabama could have a true freshman left tackle and a true freshman safety playing this year for the Tide. So we shall see. Tresman Marshall at Bama. Lad McConkey, I agree, is a little underrated for sure. Again, second team All SEC, but I still think he's underrated. But a lot of great names in the comment section there. You guys did a great job with that. We do appreciate it. Okay. When we come back next week, now I know that SEC podcast, you guys are going to have a ton of episodes leading up to this weekend. You guys will be live, of course, Sunday with Cousin Shane. You can catch this episode in podcast form, of course, on the podcast feed. Just search SEC Football Live anywhere you get your podcast. But when we convene next week, official final SEC championship predictions and football games. A whole lot of football games. We get to react to a football game and we get to talk about football games. Talking season is done. It's done. It's over.
Vanderbilt better win or I may not show up. I'll be so disappointed.
Same. Retweet.
Repost, re-X, whatever the fuck it's called.
Re-X.
Thank you guys all for hanging out. We do appreciate you guys. Aaron at the Aaron Dugan on Twitter, Aaron_Dugan on Instagram. Of course, you guys know Mike. You can get him everywhere across all the platforms. And we do appreciate all you guys for hanging out in the comments. Much, much appreciated. Makes it a lot more fun to hang out. So even if you're talking shit to me, I'm fine with it. It's what we're here for. For Mike and Aaron, I am Braden. Thank you guys for listening. We'll talk to you next Tuesday. This has been SEC Football Live.
All attention's good attention.